My sister Victoria never visited our dying father or went to his funeral, but when she blew her $180K in 6 months, she sued me to steal my inheritance and pay for her husband's surgery. The judge destroyed her and she never saw coming what happened next. I'm 17 years old. I'm finishing my last year of high school, and honestly, I still can't believe everything that happened with my sister Victoria after my dad died. I mean, I always knew she was a bit controlling and dramatic, but I never thought she'd go as far as to literally try to steal my inheritance. And when I say steal, it's not an exaggeration. She really tried to do it through the courts and everything. But anyway, I guess I should start from the beginning so this makes sense. Victoria is 27 years old. She's 10 years older than me, and she's always been like the perfect daughter in the eyes of some family members. You know, the one who got married first, the one who has her own house, all that stuff. But the truth is that she and my Aunt Patricia, who is my dad's sister, have never gotten along. Like, for as long as I can remember, they've had conflicts, and Victoria has always tried to control everything that happens in the family. My dad never wanted to get too involved in those dramas because he said life was too short to be fighting, and looking back, I think he knew exactly how right he was. Everything started getting really bad during my junior year of high school, when my dad started having heart problems. It wasn't something new. He'd had episodes before, but this time things were different. The doctors said his heart was weak and that he needed constant care, medications every day, and basically someone to look after him because he'd been living alone since my mom died when I was like 8 years old. Victoria at that time was already married to Brandon, her husband, who also has some chronic illness. I never really understood what exactly, because Victoria always exaggerated everything. The thing is that when my dad started getting sick, my Aunt Patricia was the one who stepped up. She lives like 20 minutes from where my dad lived, and she basically put her life on pause to take care of him. She went every day, made him food, took him to his medical appointments, made sure he took his medicines, everything. And it's not like Victoria didn't know what was happening, because my aunt sent her messages constantly with updates, told her how dad was doing, what the doctors said, all that. But Victoria just didn't show up. She always had an excuse, that Brandon was sick, that she had work, that it was too far, literally anything but coming to see our dad. I was still living with my dad at that time because, well, I was 16 years old and was in school, but I also tried to help however I could. I'd come home from classes and stay with him. We'd watch TV together. I'd keep him company. My Aunt Patricia practically moved into the house those last months, and I'm going to be eternally grateful to her because without her, I don't know what would have happened. My dad loved her a lot. He always said she was an angel, and he was right. Then one day, it was a Tuesday, I think, I had just gotten home from school, and I heard a weird noise in the kitchen. I ran over, and my dad was on the floor. He had collapsed. I called emergency services immediately, and my Aunt Patricia, and she got there before the ambulance because she literally flew over there. They took him to the hospital, and the next few days were horrible. I'm not going to lie. He was connected to a bunch of machines, could barely talk, and the doctors told us his heart was failing and there wasn't much they could do anymore. And you know who didn't show up at the hospital even once during those 2 weeks? Victoria. My aunt called her, sent her messages. I sent her like 50 texts, telling her that Dad was very serious, that she had to come, and she only responded with things like, "I'll see if I can," or, "Brandon is very sick today. I can't leave him alone." I mean, our dad was dying, and she couldn't be bothered to drive 40 minutes to see him. To this day, that makes my blood boil. My dad died on a Thursday morning. I was there. My Aunt Patricia was there holding his hand, and it was peaceful at the end, I guess, if those things can be peaceful. The doctors said he wasn't suffering anymore. I called Victoria like 3 hours later, when I had already processed a bit what had happened, and she started screaming on the phone saying why hadn't I called her earlier, that she had a right to be there. All this drama. I told her that we had been begging her to come for 2 weeks, and that she chose not to, and I hung up because I didn't have energy for her nonsense at that moment. The funeral was 4 days later, and guess who didn't go? Exactly, Victoria. She said Brandon was too sick for her to leave the house, that he needed her. She didn't even send flowers. People at the funeral were asking about her, and I didn't know what to say. It was embarrassing. My Aunt Patricia was furious, but tried to keep her composure because it was her brother's funeral, and she didn't want to cause a scene. A week after the funeral, Mr. Williams, who was my dad's lawyer, called us in to read the will. That's when Victoria showed up, with Brandon and everything, both of them with long faces as if they'd been suffering all this time. The will was pretty simple. My dad left everything divided 50-50 between Victoria and me. The house, his savings, his life insurance, everything split in half. But since I was a minor, my part was under the custody of my Aunt Patricia until I turned 18, which was going to be in like 6 months because my birthday is in August. My dad made it very clear in the will that he trusted my Aunt Patricia to manage my inheritance, and that she had authorization to use that money for my education, my support, whatever I needed. Victoria didn't say anything at that moment, but I saw the face she made when Mr. Williams explained the custody part. Brandon looked annoyed too, but they left without making drama that day. I went to live with my Aunt Patricia officially, which honestly was a relief because she was already practically my mother figure anyway. Things were quiet for like 2 months. I was focused on finishing school, still processing my dad's death, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I want to study medicine. It's always been my dream. And with my dad's inheritance, I was going to be able to pay for college without problems, which was a huge relief. My Aunt Patricia sold my dad's house because neither of us wanted to live there without him, and that money was added to the inheritance. In total, my part was like $180,000, considering the house, the savings, the life insurance, everything. A decent amount of money, especially for a 17-year-old. Then, Victoria started calling. At first, it was like casual, asking how I was, if I needed anything, all nice and concerned. I thought that maybe Dad's death had made her reflect, that maybe she was going to be a better sister, you know. I had hope. But then the hints started. That if Brandon needed a very expensive surgery, that if they were having money problems, that if I could consider helping them. I told her I was sorry, but my money was intended for my education, and that anyway, my Aunt Patricia was the one managing it. That's when things got ugly. Like, really ugly. Victoria started calling my Aunt Patricia directly, demanding that she give her part of my inheritance. She said Brandon needed this urgent surgery that cost like $80,000, and that we had a family obligation to help. My aunt obviously told her no. That money was mine, and it was legally protected for me. Victoria started screaming on the phone, saying that my aunt had always hated her, that she was trying to separate us, that she was also our dad's daughter and deserved more than what she'd gotten. And here's where I found out something that left me frozen. Turns out Victoria had already spent her entire part of the inheritance. All of it. In 6 months, she had blown through $180,000. On what, you might ask, because I asked too. My Aunt Patricia investigated a bit because she started to suspect, and we discovered that Victoria and Brandon had bought a new car, one of those luxury SUVs that cost like $60,000. They went on vacation to Europe for 3 weeks. They renovated their entire house, put in new floors, new furniture, a complete new kitchen. They bought designer clothes, jewelry. They literally threw the money around like it was infinite. And now that they had nothing left, they wanted mine. The audacity is impressive. Really. My aunt explained to her that even if she wanted to help, she couldn't legally give that money to Victoria because that's not what it was for. My dad's will was very clear. That money was for my education and my future. But Victoria wouldn't take no for an answer. She started calling other family members, telling them her version of the story, saying that my Aunt Patricia was manipulating me against her, that she was pulling me away from my sister, that she just wanted to help. Her sick husband and we were heartless, selfish people. Some uncles and cousins started calling me asking what was going on. If it was true that I didn't want to help my sister, I had to explain the complete situation to them. That Victoria hadn't come to see Dad when he was dying, that she didn't go to the funeral, that she'd spent her entire inheritance on bullshit and now wanted mine. Most understood, but there were some who thought I should be more compassionate and help family. That hurt because they were basically asking me to sacrifice my future for Victoria's mistakes. Victoria's calls and messages became more aggressive. She told me I was a selfish kid. that I didn't understand what it was to have adult responsibilities, that Dad would be disappointed in me. That last one made me cry because I knew it wasn't true. My dad had left his will that way specifically to protect me, but it still hurt to hear it. Brandon also started sending me messages, telling me that I had his life in my hands, that without that surgery he could die, making me feel guilty for a situation they themselves had created. My Aunt Patricia advised me to block their numbers, and I did. But then they started showing up at her house. They literally showed up unannounced, banged on the door like crazy, yelled from outside. Once Brandon almost fainted in my aunt's yard because, according to him, his illness was killing him and it was my fault. We had to call the police to make them leave. It was horrible. I felt harassed in my own home. Then, like 3 months after the will reading, we received a legal notification. Victoria had filed a petition in court to remove my Aunt Patricia as custodian of my inheritance and appoint herself instead. Her argument was that my Aunt Patricia was manipulating me, that she had undue influence over me, and that as my older sister, she should be the one managing my money until I turned 18. She also alleged that my aunt had conflicts of interest and that she was using my inheritance for her own benefit, which was a complete lie. My Aunt Patricia got in touch with Mr. Williams immediately, and he told us this was serious, that we needed to prepare well because Victoria apparently had hired a lawyer and was determined to fight this. We had to gather all the documentation, all the bank records that showed exactly what my money had been used for, which was basically for my school, clothes, food, normal things that a teenager needs. My Aunt Patricia hadn't touched a single cent for herself. But the day of the hearing, I was super nervous, like I felt like I was going to throw up. Victoria arrived with Brandon, both of them dressed very formally, putting on serious faces. Her lawyer started presenting the case, saying all these things about how my Aunt Patricia had been alienating me from my sister, that I needed my older sister's guidance, that it was what was best for me. They mentioned Brandon's surgery thing, trying to make it sound like an urgent medical emergency that I was refusing to help resolve. Then, it was Mr. Williams' turn, and he basically destroyed their case piece by piece. First, he presented Victoria's bank records that showed exactly how she'd spent her $180,000 in 6 months. The judge looked more and more upset as he saw the figures. $60,000 on a car, $25,000 on vacation, $40,000 on house renovations that weren't even necessary, $15,000 on clothes and jewelry. It was obscene. Then Mr. Williams presented evidence of all the harassment. We had recordings of the voicemails. Victoria and Brandon had left. Some were really aggressive and threatening. We had screenshots of all the text messages where they called me selfish, where they blamed me for Brandon's illness, where they threatened to do whatever was necessary to get the money. We had the police report from when they had to come, remove Victoria and Brandon from my aunt's property. Then he presented my Aunt Patricia's documentation, showing that every cent of my inheritance had been used appropriately and that everything was perfectly documented. He showed that I was finishing high school with good grades, that I was applying to universities to study medicine, that my life was in order thanks to my aunt's responsible care. And then, and this was the most shocking, Mr. Williams called people to testify who had been present during my dad's illness, nurses from the hospital who confirmed that Victoria never went to visit him, the funeral director who confirmed that Victoria didn't attend the funeral, people who had tried to contact Victoria during those critical moments and had been ignored. I had to testify too, and I told them everything. I told them how Victoria had been absent when Dad needed us, how she'd started harassing us for money as soon as she found out hers was gone, how she made me feel guilty for something that wasn't my responsibility. I cried a bit, talking about my dad. I'm not going to lie, because it still hurt a lot, but I also think the judge needed to see how real all this was for me. Victoria testified too, and basically dug her own grave. She started getting defensive when they asked her why she hadn't visited our dad, saying she had her own responsibilities and that nobody understood how difficult her life was. When they asked her about her inheritance, she tried to justify all her expenses, saying she deserved to enjoy the money after everything she'd suffered. The judge literally raised an eyebrow at that, and I knew in that moment we had won. The verdict was quick. The judge completely dismissed Victoria's petition, confirmed that my Aunt Patricia would continue being the custodian of my inheritance, and also decided to investigate Victoria for perjury and fraud because she had lied on legal documents about multiple things. He said something I'll never forget, that it was clear Victoria didn't have her younger brother's best interests in mind, only her own financial interests, and that it was shameful she had tried to manipulate the legal system this way. Victoria and Brandon left the court furious. She was yelling that this wasn't over, that she was going to appeal, that she was going to make sure my Aunt Patricia paid for this. But nothing else ever happened because her lawyer probably told her she had no case and would only lose more money trying. The perjury investigation went forward, and Victoria ended up being fined, like she had to pay like $10,000 in fines and do community service. Also, the judge ordered her to do anger management therapy and established a temporary restraining order that prohibited her from contacting me or coming within 100 meters of me or my aunt's house. That was a huge relief. I could finally feel safe in my own home. Now I'm 17. I'm about to turn 18 in a few months, and all my inheritance money is still intact. I already applied to several universities to study medicine, and I'm going to be able to pay for them, without problems thanks to my Aunt Patricia protecting my future when Victoria tried to destroy it. My aunt is still the most important person in my life. She's basically my mom now, and I'm eternally grateful for everything she did for me and for my dad. I haven't spoken to Victoria since the hearing. Some family members have told me that she and Brandon are having money problems, that they had to sell the new car and that they're struggling with debts. Part of me feels sorry. I'm not going to lie, because at the end of the day, she's my sister. But another part of me thinks she brought all this on herself. She had the same amount of money as me, had the same opportunities, and chose to waste them. And then, instead of accepting the consequences of her decisions, she tried to steal my future. My dad wrote me a letter that my Aunt Patricia gave me after the funeral. He had left it with his important things. In that letter, he told me he trusted that I was going to use my inheritance wisely, that I was going to pursue my dreams of being a doctor, that I was going to do something good with my life. He also told me to always take care of myself first, not to let anyone make me feel guilty for protecting my future. It's like he knew exactly what was going to happen. Sometimes I think about how things would have been if Victoria had been different. If she had been there when Dad was sick, if she had gone to the funeral, if she had managed her inheritance responsibly. Maybe we could have a relationship. Maybe I could help her, now that I have the means, but she chose her path, and that path didn't include me until she needed something from me. Last week, I got accepted into my first choice university, a pretty competitive pre-med program. I called my Aunt Patricia crying with happiness, and she cried too. She told me, my dad would be proud, and I know she's right. All this drama with Victoria was horrible, and robbed me of months of peace of mind when I should have been processing my grief, but in the end she couldn't touch what really matters. My future is intact. I have my Aunt Patricia who supports me unconditionally, and I'm going to be able to fulfill my dreams thanks to my dad being wise enough to protect my inheritance from the wrong people. That's what matters.